Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to give you an overview of the European project DRYvER that stands for Securing Biodiversity, Functional Integrity, and Ecosystem Services in Drying River Networks. Over 60% of the global river network is naturally intermittent, which means that drying rivers are not anecdotic, they are the norm. But climate change and increased human water use cause rivers and streams to dry up, including in Europe, and this is dramatically increasing worldwide. In Europe, you can see that this summer was pretty dry throughout Europe. There is thus an urgent need to understand the socio-ecological consequences of drying, because the shift from permanent to intermittent flows represent a major tipping point for rivers, with dramatic environmental, but also socio-economical and even geopolitical consequences. DRYvER is a research and innovation action that is running from September 2020 for 4 years. It comprises 25 pluridisciplinary partners that you can see on this map. That includes 13 academics from Europe, 3 academics from CELAC, standing for country of South America, 2 international partners from the US and from China, from academia, 4 small and medium enterprise, and 3 stakeholders. In addition, DRYvER is working with 9 focal drying river network, DRN, selected across Europe and South America, and also 1 in China and 1 in the US. The high-level model of DRYvER is presented on the figure on the right-hand side of this slide. Basically, the adaptive management cycle of DRYvER aims at converting climate change into the fragmentation of river network by drying. That's the hydrologic work package. Then to look at the consequences of this fragmentation on meta-community dynamics in drying river networks, that's the biodiversity work package. Looking at how the biophysical changes are influencing the ecosystem function, that's the biogeochemistry work package. How this cascade into the delivery and provision of ecosystem services, but also their value. And then we've got a last work package that integrates all this knowledge to promote an adaptive management of drying river network. So the aim of DRYvER is to have this wheel rolling. We are moving from the parochial intermittent river study to encompass river network and their intrinsic diversity of flow regime, drying being a key component of every river network. We will translate climate change projection into changes in flow intermittence pattern at multiple scales, including at that of the 9 strategically selected drying river network. We will implement a dynamic meta-system perspective to understand the cascading changes in biodiversity, ecosystem function, and ecosystem services. And last, we will develop a multi-criteria decision framework combining scientific management and socio-economic, legislative barrier and leverages to promote an adaptive management of river network. To calibrate this high-level model, we will work, that's one example of a focal drying river network in France, the Albarine. We are using this meta-system approach. Basically, this is a case study that is about 200 square kilometers, and you can see the river network with a dashed line representing intermittent reaches and continuous line the permanent reaches. We've got 20 sampling reaches, blue for perennial and orange for intermittent, on which we are modeling current and future flow intermittence pattern using spatially distributed hydrological models. We are exploring the meta-community dynamic in space and time with 20 sites sampled 6 times to quantify how fragmentation by drying alters biofilm, invertebrates, and fish meta-communities now and in the future. We also measure at all of these sampling sites a bunch of biogeochemical function at 4 different dates to quantify our fragmentation by drying cascades into biogeochemical functions such as stream metabolism, leaf litter decomposition, or greenhouse gases emission now and in the future, both at the local and regional scales. We're also looking at a specialized socio-economical approach an analysis of ecosystem services in each DRYvER network in co-construction with local stakeholders. And thus, we will translate this knowledge from work package 1 to 4 into tools to mitigate and adapt to climate change in DRYvER network. That includes policy opportunities, socio-economical barriers, and citizen input, thanks to citizen science. Then, across all this work package, we are upscaling the scenario of biodiversity, function, and services at the continental scale, primarily Europe, but also global. For example, for flow intermittence, that's already done. That was published last year in Nature. We are upscaling the pattern of flow intermittence across the global hydrological network, and that's where we quantify that over 60% of the global river networks is prone to flow intermittence. And we will do that with biodiversity scenario, biogeochemical scenario, ecosystem scenario. And we will also develop a tool at the European scale, a multi-criteria decision-making tool to mitigate and adapt the effect of drying. That also, I forgot to mention before, that also include nature-based solution. In terms of scientific impact, DRYvER is producing global maps of climate change impact in DRYvER network, present and future, producing global scenario of aquatic biodiversity, ecosystem function, and ecosystem services in DRYvER network, identification of tipping point in drying in space and time that allows to define safe operational spaces, notably for managers. Just an example that could specify the range of flow intermittence above which the traditional biomonitoring approach for the Water Framework Directive are totally ineffective, which we are sort of estimating at about 80%, which means that 20% of flow intermittence is acceptable, but above this threshold, it seems that the current approach is not working, which is a serious problem considering the vast amount of DRYvER network in Europe. We also look at enhanced social value of DRYvER network because the main issue here is that people, including many people in this audience, I guess, are not valuing DRYvER network. It's not a river, it's dead, it's without life, etc., which is totally wrong. So we will work at enhancing the social value of DRYvER networks. That includes the development of a citizen science app, which I will present later. We will assess the cost benefits of nature-based solution implementation at the DRYvER network we are studying and the socio-economical efficiency of different management action, not only NBS, it could also be just like gray infrastructure and so on. We have, in terms of scientific impact, the first publication, we published the full proposal. We published a very nice paper led by Mathis Messager in Nature last year on the global prevalence. And we have all the work packages have been working for the first 2 years in collecting data and conceptualizing things. So that's 2 papers, for example, on the Metasystem 3, how it can help to manage rivers in the Anthropocene. Also, why genomic tools can help to understand and manage intermittent rivers. So that has been conceptualized and published, and the data now are completely collected. And so the second part of the project, we are now analyzing this data. So we expect many more output soon. In terms of societal and policy impact, we will assess the socioeconomic impact of changes in DRYvER networks through the identification of services and their value, identify the option for environmental decision making by exploring adaptive management strategy, economic appraisal, and identifying legislative barriers, but also opportunities and associated financing mechanism. We will enable science policy interfacing at local, national, regional, and European levels to embrace adaptive management strategies of DRYvER network through co-design. build stakeholder capacity through co-construction and participatory process, including citizen science, to understand the interaction between climate change and biodiversity, ecosystem function and services, and take responsibility in protecting drying river networks through active engagement in research, monitoring, and management. We also have a dedicated stakeholder committee that discusses with the scientific partner to provide information priority for the focal drying river network, but also learn from us from the high-level model. The stakeholders are strongly involved in the socio-economic valuation to favor co-construction approaches and processes at each focal drying river network, but also help with the organization of stakeholder workshops that are organized every year at each drying river network. It coordinates, triggers the use of the citizen science application that is called DRYvER to gather drying observation, contribute to issues rising from the stakeholder committee, because some are not anticipated. For example, we have realized that in Finland, the focal drying river network is strongly impacted by forestry. So we then need to include that into our analysis that was not initially expected. And they will contribute to extending the network of stakeholders with national and European level stakeholders to disseminate DRYvER results and raise awareness of the issue of drying, including at the IPCC and IPBES. I was talking about the smartphone application. Here it is. It's called DRYvER. It's fully open access, open source, and it has been developed to last forever compared to the existing applications that are owned by private companies. So funding is never guaranteed. It's very easy. Basically, you just open it with geolocalization. You take a photo and you feel a field whether the river is flowing, non-flowing, like as disconnected pool or completely dry. And then we gather that on the database and we will put that on the atlas that could be merged with the EMBER atlas at the Joint Research Center to have a European atlas of drying river network. It has been released last year and it has not 500, it has more than 3,000 observations. It's a real success and it's translated into 23 languages. So please do use it or make the promotion of it. That would be very, very helpful for us, but also for the future generation. So that's the atlas we are aiming for. That's the example on the left-hand side of, right-hand side of EMBER, the fragmentation, permanent fragmentation by drying is also a temporary adjunct of fragmentation, and we will make similar atlas by the end of the project, compiling not only DRYvER, but also the other applications that are used in hydrology, like Crowd Water, Enquête d'eau in France, or ReUnet in Spain. We have a clustering component to liaise with relevant ongoing project, research group, PhD project across continents. So we have very good linkages with people from the US. There is a sort of cost action in the US on intermittent rivers. There is also a large group working on intermittent rivers in Australia, just because the vast majority of Australian rivers are intermittent. And we have lots of activities. We are also making links with other European projects, such as Ponderful, that is looking at the effect of climate change on the ecology of small water bodies. The first measure output, as I was mentioning, was this map that has changed severely the way scientists, but also managers consider a river. Not going into the detail. I will just now show you some photo to end up with this presentation about the different case study, because we are embracing a large variability from south to northern Europe, from the east to the west, but also then being in South America in a neotropical context, and in China, in the US. So those are just pictures for your distraction if you want. So that's the case study in Finland. Probably this is high key sampling there. That is starting to dry. And drying is a novel phenomenon in Finland. That's the Albarine River in France that has been dry for a very long time. It's naturally intermittent, but climate change is exacerbating the drying in space and time. That's the very dry river network in southern Spain that has been probably drying and fragmented by drying for till the last glaciation. So species are highly adapted there. That's another thing we are looking at. That's a river in Czech Republic that Central Europe in general has been very dry in the past 5 years, and there's more and more rivers that have been perennial so far, but are just starting to dry. This year is also particularly dry in Czech Republic and in Hungary. That's Hungary, a river that is also modified by human downstream, as you can see. This is the river in Ecuador. No, in Ecuador, yes. It's on the Pacific lowland, so not on the Amazonian or in the high elevation part of Ecuador, but still it's a river that, as you can see, can be very dry. I think there is like 6 or 7 meters of rain annually on this part. It does not impede rivers to dry up. So that's a very dry river in Bolivia. It's not in the Altiplano, it's near Sucre for those who know. So it's quite semi-arid area, but people are really depending, as you can see, on the water here. So drying is really a disaster for people. That's in Brazil. That's very dry. It's actually very difficult to sample there because it's mostly dry. They have to go to be sampling when there is a storm, basically. That's the river in China that is not so much altered by human, but can be very, very dry. And then no picture of the river in the US, but it's in Pennsylvania, so it's not in a very arid area. So with that, I thank you for your attention. If you have any question, particularly with respect to how DRYvER could provide input, for example, to the application of the Water Framework Directive, I was mentioning one example that drying is really messing up with the tools that we are using at the moment throughout Europe. Don't hesitate to drop me an email and I will be very happy to respond to your question or to interact with you. Many thanks for your attention and have a nice afternoon.